What happens when royal privilege meets reality television? In just 32 seconds, one shocking comment would destroy a carefully planned interview and expose the true character of a guest who thought he was untouchable. The studio lights were blazing hot as Jonathan Ross settled into his iconic chair, straightening his tie one final time. Across from him sat Prince Harry, looking relaxed but with something simmering beneath the surface. The audience was electric with anticipation. This was supposed to be a friendly chat, a chance for Harry to promote his latest charity work and connect with the British public. "So Harry," Jonathan began with his trademark grin, "tell us about this new project you're working on. I hear it's quite close to your heart." Harry leaned back, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "Well, Jonathan, it's something most people wouldn't understand. You have to have lived my life to really get what real charity work means." The host raised an eyebrow but kept smiling. "I'm sure our audience would love to understand. Can you help us mere mortals out?" "Look," Harry said, his tone shifting. "When you've grown up with real responsibility, when you've had the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders since birth, these little charity drives that regular people do, they're sweet, but they're not really making a difference." Jonathan's smile faltered slightly. The audience grew quiet. "Well, I think many people would disagree with that. There are incredible volunteers and donors out there doing amazing work." Harry laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Jonathan, with respect, you host a chat show. You interview celebrities and comedians. What would you know about real service to your country?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I think service comes in many forms, Harry, and I think the people watching at home, many of whom volunteer their time and donate what they can, might find that comment a bit insulting." "Insulting?" Harry's voice rose slightly. "What's insulting is pretending that everyone's contribution is equal. Some of us were born to serve. Others were born to entertain." The audience was dead silent now. Jonathan leaned forward, his famous charm replaced by genuine concern. "Harry, I think you might want to reconsider what you're saying here. You're talking to millions of hardworking people who care deeply about their communities." But Harry was just getting started. "You want to know what I really think, Jonathan? I think this whole setup is beneath me, sitting here, answering questions from someone who's never had real responsibility for an audience that doesn't understand what true sacrifice means." Jonathan's face was stone serious now. "Harry, I'm going to give you a chance to walk that back. There are people watching who've lost family members in service, who work multiple jobs to support their families, who volunteer every weekend at food banks and homeless shelters. And that's lovely for them," Harry said dismissively. "But let's not pretend it's the same thing as what my family does. We don't choose this life. We're born into duty. These people, they're just playing at being important." The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Jonathan's hands were clenched in his lap, but his voice remained controlled. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, Harry. I've interviewed prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, war heroes, and yes, many members of your family. And I have never, ever heard anyone speak with such disrespect for ordinary people." Harry's face flushed red. "Disrespect? I'm being honest. Someone has to say what everyone's thinking but is too polite to admit. There are people who matter and people who don't. There are people who make real decisions and people who just exist." "Right," Jonathan said, his voice getting quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. "And which category do you think I fall into, Harry?" The prince looked directly at his host, his eyes cold. "I think you know exactly where you stand, Jonathan. You're here to make people laugh and forget about their problems for an hour. I'm here because my presence alone can change lives, can bring attention to causes that actually matter." Jonathan nodded slowly. "And our audience? The millions of people watching right now?" Harry shrugged. "They're entertainment for me, Jonathan, just like you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan stared at Harry for a long moment, and something shifted in the host's expression. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more direct. "You know what, Harry? In 20 years of doing this show, I've learned something important. You can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat people they think are beneath them." Harry's confident smirk wavered slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Jonathan said, standing up slowly, "that you've just shown millions of people exactly who you really are." The prince shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Excuse me? I'm here as a favor to you, Jonathan. This little show of yours gets its biggest ratings when someone like me appears." Jonathan remained standing, his voice growing stronger. "A favor? Harry, You came on this show to promote your charity, but you've spent the last 10 minutes insulting every single person who might donate to it. They should donate because of who I am, not because they feel good about themselves." Harry shot back. "That's the difference between real leadership and this feel-good nonsense you peddle." A few audience members started to murmur. Jonathan held up his hand for quiet, never taking his eyes off Harry. "Real leadership? Harry, can you tell me the name of one person in our audience tonight?" Harry looked confused. "What? One name. Just one. Of the 200 people sitting right there who came to see this show. Why would I need to know their names?" Harry asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because," Jonathan said, his voice rising slightly, "every single one of them has a story. Every one of them has struggles and dreams and people they love. They're not entertainment. They're not beneath you. They're human beings who deserve basic respect." Harry waved dismissively. "That's very noble, Jonathan, but let's be realistic. They came to see me. They want to feel close to royalty for one evening. It's like feeding time at the zoo. They get their excitement. I get my publicity." A woman in the front row gasped audibly. Several other audience members started talking among themselves, their voices growing agitated. Jonathan's face went white with anger. Did you just compare our audience to animals at feeding time?" Harry realized he'd crossed a line but doubled down instead of backing off. "I'm just being honest about what this is. You create a spectacle. They consume it. It's entertainment, Jonathan. It's not real life." "Not real life?" Jonathan's voice cracked slightly. "Harry, the woman in the third row there? She wrote to us because she's been caring for her disabled husband for 15 years while working 2 jobs. The man behind her? He's a teacher who spends his own money buying supplies for kids whose parents can't afford them." Harry barely glanced at the audience. "And I'm sure they're very nice people, but that doesn't change the fact that they're here to see me, not you. They want proximity to something greater than their ordinary lives." The murmuring in the audience was getting louder. Someone shouted, "Disgraceful!" from the back rows. Jonathan stepped closer to Harry's chair. "Something greater? Harry, that teacher has probably done more real good in 1 year than you've done in your entire life." "How dare you?" Harry snapped, finally showing real anger. "My family has served this country for centuries. We've dedicated our lives to duty while people like him, like all of them, lived their small, meaningless lives." The audience erupted. People were standing up, shouting. Some were trying to leave. Others were calling out angrily at Harry. Jonathan raised his voice over the crowd. "Harry, I need you to stop talking right now." But Harry was past caring about consequences. "Why should I stop? Because the truth hurts? Because your precious audience can't handle hearing what they actually are?" "What they actually are," Jonathan repeated, his voice dangerously quiet despite the chaos around them. Harry stood up to face Jonathan directly. "They're subjects, Jonathan. They exist to serve people like me. That's how it's always been, and that's how it should be." The studio fell silent again, but this time, it was the silence of pure shock. Jonathan stared at Harry for what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more power than any shout could have. "They exist to serve you?" Harry crossed his arms defiantly. "That's how monarchy works, Jonathan. That's how it's always worked. They pay their taxes. We provide leadership and stability. It's a fair trade." "A fair trade?" Jonathan's voice was still quiet, but there was something building beneath it. "Harry, these people don't serve you. They're not your subjects. They're citizens of a democracy who happen to live in a constitutional monarchy." Harry rolled his eyes. "Semantics, Jonathan. Call them whatever you want. The relationship is the same." A man in the middle section stood up. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," he called out, his voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't serve you. I served my country." Harry barely glanced in his direction. "And I'm grateful for your service to the crown." "Not to the crown," the veteran said, louder now. "To my country, to my family, to people I'll never meet but who deserve to live in freedom." Harry turned to Jonathan with an exasperated expression. "Can you control your audience, please? This is getting ridiculous." That was it. That was the moment Jonathan Ross finally lost his famous composure. "Control my audience?" Jonathan's voice exploded across the studio. "They're not animals in a cage, Harry. They're human beings expressing their opinions, something you clearly don't think they're entitled to do." Harry stepped back, startled by the sudden volume. "I just think there should be some order here, some respect for protocol." "Protocol?" Jonathan laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. "You want to talk about protocol? Let me tell you what protocol actually means. Protocol means treating guests with courtesy even when they're being absolute monsters. Protocol means giving people the benefit of the doubt even when they're showing you their worst side. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Jonathan continued, his voice building. But you know what else protocol means, Harry? It means that when someone comes into my house, sits in my chair, and insults my audience, my crew, and everything I've worked for, protocol means I get to ask them to leave. Harry's face went pale. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? Jonathan stepped closer. You came here tonight and called hardworking people meaningless. You compared them to animals. You said they exist only to serve you. You've insulted war veterans, teachers, carers, and millions of viewers at home. I was being honest, Harry said, his voice getting smaller. No, Jonathan said firmly. You were being cruel. And there's a big difference. A woman in the front row started to clap slowly. Then another person joined in. Within seconds, the entire audience was applauding. Not for entertainment, but in solidarity with their host. Harry looked around desperately. This is completely inappropriate. I'm a member of the royal family, and I, Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the applause, am the host of this show, and I'm telling you to leave. The clapping stopped instantly. The silence was deafening. Harry's mouth opened and closed like a fish. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life, Jonathan replied. Security will escort you out if necessary, but one way or another, you are leaving the studio right now. Do you have any idea what this will do to your career? Harry's voice cracked slightly. I could have you blacklisted from every major interview for the rest of your life. Jonathan smiled for the first time in several minutes, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Harry, if standing up for decent people and basic human dignity cost me my career, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. Harry looked around the studio desperately, as if hoping someone would come to his rescue. The crew members were all looking away. The audience was watching in stunned silence. This is insane, Harry muttered. You're throwing away the biggest interview of your career because you're offended by a little honesty. A little honesty? Jonathan's voice rose again. Harry, you called 200 people animals. You said millions of viewers exist only to serve you. You insulted a war veteran to his face. That's not honesty. That's something much uglier. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the stage. They weren't moving yet, but their presence was unmistakable. Harry saw them, and his bravado finally cracked completely. Fine. I don't need this circus anyway. I was doing you a favor by being here. No, Jonathan said quietly. You really weren't. Harry started walking toward the exit, but he couldn't resist one final shot. You know what your problem is, Jonathan? You actually think these people matter? You think their little lives and little problems are important. It's almost sweet how naive you are. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He waited until Harry was almost at the studio door. Then he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, Harry. The prince stopped and turned around. They do matter, Jonathan said simply. Every single one of them matters more than you ever will. Harry's face went bright red. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something devastating, something that would put Jonathan in his place once and for all. But he had nothing left. With as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much, Harry walked out of the studio. The heavy door slammed behind him with a resounding thud that seemed to echo forever. The audience sat in stunned silence for several heartbeats. Then, slowly, someone started clapping again. Others joined in. Within moments, the entire studio was on their feet, giving Jonathan Ross the longest standing ovation of his career. Jonathan stood there, still shaking slightly from adrenaline and emotion, looking out at the faces of the people Harry had dismissed as meaningless. Teachers and nurses, shop workers and students, parents and grandparents, veterans and volunteers. All of them applauding not just for him, but for the simple idea that everyone deserves respect. When the applause finally died down, Jonathan walked back to his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. Well, he said, his famous grin returning slowly, that wasn't exactly how we planned to end tonight's show.